Retro.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. We are your Legends of Freedom. I am Dennis Keithley.
And I have my lightsaber at hand. I am Jay Krebs.
All right, we're going to talk some Star Wars Marvel comics in this episode. But before we get into that, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Absolutely. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we are going to be discussing Inquisitors, which was a mini-series that was published by Marvel last year. It was written by Rodney Barnes, who is going to be doing the Han Solo series that's coming up, with art from Ramon Rosanas. Color artist was Guru EFX. Lettering was by VC's Joe Caramagna and Travis Lanham. Cover artists by Nick Bradshaw and Niraj Menon. The designer was Chris Lau. An editorial included Mikey J. Basso, Danny Kazem, Mark Panacea, and C.B. Cebulski. This is a story that is ostensibly about the Inquisitors and work that they're doing in the Empire, but it is much bigger than that, and we'll kind of get into the details here in a second. Well, I'll go ahead and say they are primarily looking for a Jedi who escaped Order 66. His name is Tensu Run, and he has become something of a legend, and he has the goal of reestablishing the Jedi Order, but along the way, he's been showing up to help people around the galaxy, and Darth Vader and the Empire cannot stand for this, so he sends the Inquisitors after them, and like I said, we'll get some details of the story as we go through the conversation. But before we get into the finer details, Jay, what did you think about this 4-issue miniseries?
Oh, overall, I really enjoyed it. Of course, I have a very soft spot in my heart for Inquisitors. And notice I didn't say what color lightsaber I had standing at the ready when we first started here. But I think that, there's obviously an overarching message here in this comic book series that basically says that Vader is against anything that is able to foster hope. And Tensu Run is exactly that. And so it's not even so much as quashing this particular person, which of course it is, but it's also the idea that he represents and the fact that he could potentially do some harm to the, Empire and the dark side's machinations by trying to reestablish what could potentially be a new generation of these Jedi. And so Tensu is not in any way, shape, or form, trying to hide in any of this either, which most of the Jedi at this point are. And so it's a very different, kind of juxtaposition from what we're used to with seeing how these Inquisitors operate. They're used to working in the shadows, kind of, okay, we have this report of these Jedi or this Jedi, cell, and we need to go destroy them. And so XYZ, check the boxes, boom, boom, boom. And, from the top down, Grand Inquisitor et al. In this particular series, I mean, they're just kind of handed their lightsabers back to them and saying, try again. So it's a very different way of seeing the Inquisitors that we've not really seen before. I mean, they've always been, basically unbeatable in every way, shape, and form. And this Tensu Run is just a complete opposite of that. And it was a very enjoyable way of looking at that. And I liked the storyline. But what was your take?
A little different than yours. This is a 4-issue series that I think should have been at least 6, because I feel like there was a lot of story. There were some things, some beats towards the end that I don't feel like were earned. And I suspect that is because there was cuts made to this to make it fit inside 4 issues. 2, I kind of feel like the Inquisitors came off like chumps a lot in this series. I'm not sure that Inquisitors was the appropriate title for this series. I mean, The Legend of Tensu Run, Darth Vader's, crushes hope. I don't know. You touched on some of the themes here, but I felt like this concentrated much more on Tensu Run and Darth Vader's desires than it really did what the Inquisitors were about in this 4-issue series. And honestly, I kind of feel like there's some media out there where the Inquisitors really shine. We got to see how dangerous the Grand Inquisitor could be in Rebels, and then the stuff that the Seventh Sister and the Fifth Brother could get up to in later seasons of Rebels. But there's been a lot of other instances where, and the book that Delilah S. Dawson just wrote recently.
Rise of the Red Blade, one of my favorites.
Yeah, that was a really great representation of the Inquisitors. But there's a lot of times where Jedi just don't seem to have any trouble with these guys. And Tensu did not strike me as a particularly spectacular Jedi in these 4 issues, other than he happened to accomplish some things, but I just don't feel like he did anything super amazing to defeat the Inquisitors here. And he sent them packing on multiple instances, and it took Darth Vader to ultimately take him down in this one. And so that being said, I'm just like, I'm not sure that I came away with any better appreciation for the Inquisitors than I had before I read this.
And I think you're absolutely spot on with the idea of renaming the series, something to the lines of Tensu Run. But then again, I mean, would I have wanted to read this if it was titled as such? Maybe I wouldn't have, but the
No,
idea
that's
of the
fair.
Inquisitors like drew me right in. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, yes, marketing is one thing, but do you really feel like Inquisitors was the appropriate title for this series?
No.
I mean, and I'm not one that typically is going to get bent out of shape over the title of it. I know when it came to season 3 of The Mandalorians, a lot of people are like, that should have been like Novel of the Night Owls or something, the Book of Bo-Katan as opposed to The Mandalorian. And I guess my thought was like, that's true. But, you could also see The Mandalorian in a broader sense. It was about Mandalorians, the Mandalorian way of life, et cetera, et cetera. And so that didn't bother me as much. But there is a bigger, in my opinion, there's a bigger divergence between the representation of the Mandalorian's participation in season 3 of that show than what the Inquisitors had to do here. Because the exception of the Grand Inquisitor, who is, in the first issue, plays a key role and has some interesting things to say. Like, what more do you know about the Fifth Brother from the second issue? And what more do you know about the Ninth and Seventh Sisters from the third issue? They don't really get an opportunity to do much that distinguishes them, that makes them appear like a threat. Even with the Tales of the Empire, and the episode with Barra Sophia and the Fourth Sister there, Len, we learned quite a bit about them. And I'm thinking about the Grand Inquisitor and the Third Sister in Obi-Wan Kenobi there. Much more of an opportunity to tell their stories here. But again, it just really isn't about, they are pieces of this, but it's not about them. It's not about the Inquisitorius here in this story.
That's true. Yeah, we did learn that the Fifth Brother lost an arm, though. That is
I was not expecting that.
Right.
Yeah, the poor Inquisitors, they all lose parts all the time. They just get rebuilt and sit right back out there. So, but since we're on the topic, what did you think about Tensu Run?
Well, again, just like you, he wasn't really the most impressive Jedi, I guess you could say. He seemed pretty basic, pretty average. He had a very type of confidence that he was very attuned to the ways of the Jedi. Like, he was a firm believer in this is what we need to do, and this is how we're going to rebuild this, and we have to go forward from here. He was a little bit arrogant in some ways, especially, again, with the Inquisitors, but I mean, heck, he was able to fight them back and, as you said, kind of hand them themselves and go on their way. I thought he looked a lot like a Jedi Han Solo
Yes.
In
Yes.
okay. And I'm not quite sure what was up with the goggles, like he and the other Jedi that he was with, it was like their superhero attaché kind of thing, they always had to put their goggles down when they were in battle, and I wasn't quite understanding what that was all about, but that's my
Yeah.
take.
So, yeah, Tensu Run had this whole dream of rebuilding the Jedi Order, and so they find the one planet that's got the old Jedi temple on it, and he and Pan is this other. I couldn't tell if Pan was
Yeah.
another survivor of Order 66 or someone who's just kind of picked up a lightsaber and is hanging out with Tensu Run. I didn't quite get that. Understand? It didn't help that neither one of these people were wearing Jedi robes. But there we are. And
Right.
he kept calling them brother, as well. And
Yes.
then we had Urun, who was someone who looked like a monk, right down to the haircut,
Mhm.
straight out of the Middle Ages. And they were just kind of, they talked about openly protecting Tensu and being there to support him. And I wasn't clear from the context here. Is this because this is the Jedi that the galaxy all looks at as a symbol, or it's because as opposed to them that they're lesser Jedi, or they are latching on to this Jedi? Again, the context didn't provide enough to answer that question for me. But anyway, so Tensu, he wants to rebuild the Jedi Order, so he's taking steps towards that, but he's got to evade these Inquisitors, and he does take advantage. In like the first issue, there's a flashback to when he infiltrates a planet where a bunch of people have been imprisoned, and it's supposed to be impregnable, and he infiltrates it and he gets them. He doesn't do anything especially impressive when he does. He just kind of shows up and does it. So we're kind of getting to the legend seems to be all about that he's accomplished things, not that it's not the Jedi without fear like Anakin is. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? It's like Anakin shows up and he does things in style. He just charges in and single-handedly takes out the entire base and looks awesome doing it. Um, and Vader doesn't even seem to be particularly bothered or even know that Tensu wants to set up a new Jedi temple. It's just that he is a symbol to the galaxy. And he gives them hope, and hope is the most dangerous thing to order out there.
Right. And I think, for Tensu, it wasn't necessarily that, again, he wasn't the greatest of Jedi, but his timing was
Mhm.
impeccable in terms of what people were looking for. And that's why he became a legend. And so that was the whole
Right.
vehicle to, how his character was able to, put himself into these different situations is just because the fact that he did represent hope. And he did represent, as you said, everything that Vader was against and trying to quash. And again, he was kind of just like this bug to be squashed until he started really handing the Inquisitors their what fors, and then that was really taking Vader off. And he was to the point where it's like, oh gosh, if you guys can't do this yourself, I'm gonna have to step in and do this.
Right.
And I do think it was really cool though, the way that when Vader was talking to Tensu about the dark side and the comparison between Jedi ideals and the dark side itself. And he said to him, and I took a picture of the panel, it said where Vader says, the Jedi force all to suppress their deepest desires. It is your kind who destroys the awesome potential within. And I thought, wow, is he speaking about himself and
Mhm.
his, his personal experiences with him being suppressed and his deepest desires being suppressed? And so again, it was Tensu Run that was the symbol of his former life, and I think that that's another reason why he couldn't stand him.
Yeah, essentially, I wrote that line down in our notes. It's like verbatim. It impressed me as well when I saw it here. And yeah, he's talking about that. They are first to suppress their deepest desires,
Mhm.
and that line said a lot of things to me. One, it is Anakin slash Darth Vader not taking accountability for the decisions he made. When Qui-Gon gave him the opportunity in the Phantom Menace to go with him and learn to be a Jedi, he told Anakin, it's a hard life, right? You're gonna,
Mhm.
it's gonna be a challenge here. And Anakin knew that there were certain things that he was gonna have to do and suppress desires, not form attachments. But he made that decision anyways. But then later, when he developed those feelings for Padme, and there was that opportunity. He put that aside. Again, I get a little frustrated because a lot of people tend to blame the Jedi that they were so unbending with their rules. Poor Anakin, just wanted to do these things. Why shouldn't he be allowed to do it? Well, Anakin wanted his cake and to eat it too.
Right.
He could have chosen Padme and given up the Jedi Order if that's what he wanted, but he didn't do that. He wanted to be a Jedi and to be married to Padme. The Jedi's rules weren't a secret. The Jedi weren't bending them for some people and not for others in this situation. Okay, so that's one part of it. But then this notion about bringing order to the galaxy, I'm thinking back to Attack of the Clones, where we're at the picnic scene and Anakin and Padme are kind of talking about what it is that the Senate does and why there's these difficulties. And Anakin's response is like, I think we should, people should get together, make it, discuss things, make a decision that's the best interest for everybody, and then do it. And Padme's response is, well, that's exactly what we do. It's just the problem is not everyone always agrees. And then Anakin says, well, someone should make them agree. And I'm just writing this movie, and Padme's like, stunned by this. Well, who's going to make them agree? And he's like, someone wise and powerful. And she's like, you? And he just kind of smirks. And, so there's all that where this is really an evolution of an idea for Anakin, right? Because he believed, in the idea that there should be a Senate and that they, people should decide what's in the best interest of everyone and then go do it. But then if they couldn't agree, get someone to make them agree. But this is beyond even that. It's like you have to suppress hope so that there can be order. So that's, one person overall, the Sith, he name drops the Sith in this series. They're the ones that should be in control and decide what's best for everyone so that we have order under all this. I mean, talk about totalitarian when it comes down to it. I mean, it's just, and does he generally believe that, or is that because that's the position he's found himself in after, he made the decision to follow Palpatine, become a Sith, to save Padme, and Padme died. And it's like, and so is this a confirmation bias on his part? What do you think? I mean, is this something he truly believes, or it's a decision he's made as a result of his circumstances?
Well, I think it's the latter for a lot of that, and I think that he's basically in for a penny, in for a pound. He's so far in at this point that he's lost everything, so why not embrace it? Why not just drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and, just go ahead and be the ultimate symbol of that. But yet I also think that for Vader, he found the dark side to be comforting in that way, in that he could quell everything that his former self was. He could just destroy everything that his former self was. And I think that again, is one of the reasons why Vader's aiming to extinguish all of the Jedi, is because they do represent the hope that he used to have. And he doesn't want any inspiration of, further resistance from that part of his life, you know what I mean? And because it's just kind of a slap in the face, and the whole determination to destroy Tensu Run, I think also underscores the Empire's fear of any kind of symbol that can galvanize opposition and challenge its authority.
Right, because once he's got Tensu cornered, him and the Inquisitors, Vader's telling him about how you're going to be forgotten, that you basically stood for nothing. And Tensu's response is, then forgotten I shall be. My path to the Jedi was one of redemption, not glory. I will die at peace with all I've done, Sith Lord. Can you say the same? And then Vader kills him. And, okay, so that spoke to me a couple things. It's like, my path to Jedi was one of redemption. I was like, well, what redemption from what? We didn't get that part of the story. And so, when I said that this maybe should have been like 6 issues, that's one of the reasons. There is some part of Tensu's backstory we did not get here that I think would have helped flesh this out a little bit, because it just seemed like the ending of this was so abrupt to it.
It was, yes.
Because when Vader, when they finally pinned down where Tensu Run is and all the Inquisitors, so the Grand Inquisitor, the Fifth Brother, and the Seventh and Ninth Sister are all coming after him. They barely get to the planet. And Vader contacts the Grand Inquisitor. It's like, well, have you captured him yet? And Grand Cruz is like, no, not yet, but we've got him pinned down. And then Vader's like, well, then you failed. I'm on my way.
You failed. Yep.
I'm like, well, what did we cut out to get to this point in this story? That just seemed like even super impatient for Vader. Grant, this is the guy who kills Imperial officers for being, Admiral Ozzel came out of Lightspeed too quickly. That was a shield. Well, you get to die. But that disturbance, they didn't even have a chance. They just showed up at the planet, and already it's like, oh, then you failed. And so I was like, well, what else were we supposed to get that got cut out of the story there?
Right. No, I think that's a good point. And I think you're right that it could have definitely been fleshed out a little bit more had it been a couple of more issues. But then again, I mean, would you be kind of recycling the same kind of plot lines and storylines and that type of thing, and then just going down a further rabbit hole of why the Inquisitors were so ineffective, And so in that regard, I hate to see that.
Yeah.
But then again, kind of getting back to that, I mean, it was the whole ineffectiveness of the Inquisitors, I think, were just more of a plot point than anything else.
Well, the final lines of this series are, Vader wants Tensu's head, and then he's asked about what they should do with the body, and he says, let it join the soil, which will be walked upon by those who will never know the legend of Tensu Run. Well, that's us. I mean, we never knew the legend of Tensu Run before we read this.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I don't know if this is memorable enough that if you asked me in 2 years about Tensu Run, I'd remember all the details here. And perhaps if we'd had some of that backstory, because, Uran and Pan kind of caution Tensu a little bit about the dark, because he kind of wants revenge at one point a little bit, talking about getting revenge on Vader and the Inquisitors here in a little bit. And they caution about that. And they do so like familiarly, like this is something that has come up in the past. Well, that backstory would have been really useful here, especially in light of that line. My path to Jedi was one of redemption. That could have been cool. I mean, this legend could have been something that was really amazing as opposed to a one-off from one prison break.
Right.
When it comes down to it. And even at the very beginning of the first issue, where the Grand Inquisitor shows up on the planet Targion, I kept thinking of Game of Thrones, the Targaryen.
Targaryens.
Yeah, when I read that. And
sorry.
That was pretty good, actually. But he confronts the Diagu, who are these people that are living on this planet, and he wants to know where Tensu Run is. And when the Elder refuses to tell him, the Grand Inquisitor kills him. And then he's going to kill everybody unless they get the information. And when someone budges, he summons all the children. And he's like, ultimately, this was like one of the best things about, I don't want to say it that way. It was not the best thing about the Inquisitors. It was some of the most we learned about the Grand Inquisitor, about what he was capable and what he was willing to do, was in this scene here, where, he's chiding these people. It's like, you'd be willing to sacrifice your children to save this one Jedi. And then, someone speaks up and says, well, he went to the fourth moon. And the Grand Inquisitor's like, well, we scanned the fourth moon on our way here and he wasn't there. There was nobody there. And so they kill everybody there, and then they're going to take the children off to Coruscant, where I don't know what's going to happen to them. They'll be put in one of those Imperial programs that Dedramiro was, I suppose.
Oh, there you go. Yep.
Yeah.
That's where she ended up.
Right. But again, there was opportunities here to flesh out, to make the Inquisitors more villainous, to give them an opportunity to do some stuff other than, beyond this scene where they just kept constantly losing to Tensu. So I know I'm repeating myself, but I just kind of got frustrated by that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, overall, their methods were very predictable. They were pretty ineffective. Although I will say, I think that the scene with the ninth sister and the seventh sister going undercover in the casino, that was very much out of pocket for them, which I think was kind of interesting that they had them, in that role, kind of being undercover in that way, and that they weren't just going into this casino with their lightsabers blaring and saying, all right, tell us what you know. So that was completely different. It was very clumsy.
I mean, it's just like, because they show up at like you said, they show up at the casino, and the guy who runs it is named Urgus. And it's just kind of like, tell me where the Jedi is, and they're supposed to be undercover. And then he won't do so. He's like, this is valuable information. And, if you want, he's basically trying to get them to gamble on it. And when they don't do it, then the seventh sister pulls out a dagger and stabs him in the hand. And it's like they turn the table over. I mean, I it's that whole table flipping emoji thing that I just kept had in my mind when that happened. And it was just kind of like, wow. I mean, there was an opportunity there to have these two really shine in battle, and they didn't take advantage of it in this instance. Yes, the undercover thing was pretty cool. It could have been an idea, but we got in on the tail end of that. It's just they're Inquisitors. We've seen them do so many cool things, but they just got shown up here by Vader and Tensu Run. It was more a story about those two, and the Inquisitors were a background to all of that. And so again, it's just and that's fine. The Inquisitors, we've seen them as backgrounds in other stories. It was the Tales of the Empire, which we talked about, was really not about the Inquisitors. It was about Barriss Offee there, and it still worked there. Yeah. But this could have been. There could have been so much more developed about it. I feel like for a series called Inquisitors, it was one of the least informative things about the Inquisitors.
Well, and I think to your point, about the fact that it could have been a little bit longer, the fact that this was so limited, I mean, that also means that there just wasn't enough room to develop or elevate them.
Right.
They were just these kind of ineffective placeholders until Vader intervened. And, you're right, it's unfortunate that they weren't fleshed out more, or even that there wasn't more Inquisitors that were represented. But I mean, I know you have to draw more and
Which
have more
Inquisitor could you
assets
possibly be talking about here?
I don't know. Maybe someone named Lynn.
Right.
But there's also like the opportunity. I don't know what the timing would have been, but maybe Iskat Akaris, as the 13th sister, could have made one of her original debuts in something like this, So I don't know how, like I said, where the timing would have been when she became an Inquisitor, but that would be a really cool addition to see her make the jump from that media to something like this.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know when this comic was being written, illustrated, if they had that opportunity, but that would have been a welcome addition. She went on plenty of missions with the Inquisitor before Vader finally killed her. That would have been fantastic to see her. It would have been some great, I hate to use this as buzzwords, but I can't think of a better one at the moment, synergy between different pieces of Star Wars content there. Having the fourth sister show up in this would have been great. I get the feeling Barriss Offee was already out of the picture, but we know she was. She only did like 2 missions before she decided the Inquisitorial life was not for her. Okay, but I mean, I don't want to keep picking on this. There was some cool things that did stand out to me. It was fun to see the various Jedi starfighters that Tensu Run and Uran and Pan were using in this. What was something else that stood out to you that you liked?
Well, was his more of a pink color or was it more of a melon color? I couldn't decide. It was kind of like a peachish color. I've never seen that color starfighter before.
It didn't stand out to me when I saw that. To me, it was one of the more traditional. Maybe it was just my screen. One of the red maroon type colors that they have on those starfighters.
Yeah. Okay. But no, I appreciated the world building because they did go to a few different worlds, and even though we're not familiar with them, I think they did a good job with the people that were there, and I like the idea of this temple. And there's all of these different temples that are existing all over the galaxy, and it goes back even to Rebels. That when we see that, with Kanan and Ezra finding the Jedi Temple, so I liked that part of the lore as well. And I did like the fact that here's this Jedi that's out there, basically not willing to hide and willing to say, "Hey, I'm willing to die for this," even though you may quash me, the hope is still going to be there. So again, it's just the idea of that, I think.
Yeah. If there is one Inquisitor that shined in this for me, it was the Grand Inquisitor. I already talked about the scene where he shows up on Targion and threatens the Daegu, but then later he's involved in Master Elan's death. He's also got some philosophy about the Jedi and why he turned on them that comes throughout this series, which I think is pretty cool. If any of the Inquisitors shines, I think it's him through all of this. So that was cool to see. It was also cool to see, they went to Glee and Selm, which we get to hear about in Solo. That's where Beckett wants to retire to. And so there's some neat little Easter egg type things there as well.
No, I agree. Overall, it was worth it. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, I liked it. I like I said, I really get the feeling that this was something that was written to be 6 issues, but then was condensed down to 4. And so that's where my frustration is in this, because it seems like there was a larger story. And if we had an opportunity to really get into, because they do have a flashback between Master Elon, Tensu Run's Jedi Master, and this, and he kind of encourages him to be careful and not follow these paths of anger and stuff like that. And Master Elon gets killed, and that's what sets Tensu, almost over the edge and all of this. I'm guessing there was more scenes like that. And I hate to speak for these writers when I don't know. This is all speculation on my part. But, if it's 4 issues, it's 4 issues. But perhaps it could have been scaled down a little bit. Did we really need to have all these different Inquisitors? Could it just not have been about the Grand Inquisitor and pick any one of the other 3 and give them an opportunity to shine? So, oh well. It's easy to criticize, not easy to make the art. And here I am. So take that as you will. Okay, well, with that, I want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of the Inquisitors. We will probably be discussing some more comics soon. We got some High Republic stuff to catch up on. And if you want to make sure that you get those episodes, then subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. You know how to do that. You're listening to this show now. Just look for that button on your podcatcher. And after you've done that, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take some time to rate and review the show on your podcatcher of choice. Those things are the best drivers of the algorithms that help put this podcast in front of others. And if you want to find more episodes of the show beyond what you're going to find on your podcatcher of choice, head over to directorsapp.com and you'll find everything that we have to offer from the past, 6 seasons of the show. So here we go. Jay, remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else we can find online.
Sure, and you don't have to try to find us in a dusty old decrepit Jedi temple. We're very easy to find on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we also have all of our Pinterest boards with all kinds of fun Star Wars ideas, and our 2 YouTube outlets, which include both the traditional YouTube and YouTube music. So no videos, just static pictures that Dennis always does a great job picking out, but you can always leave comments, questions, interactions, ratings, reviews, and that really does help us out. So we would appreciate that. And we also have our TeePublic store, which includes 7 different show logo designs. So you've got lots to pick from on everything from home goods to apparel and everything in between. So if you'd like to pick something up, the link to that is in our show notes. And every one of those purchases does help to support the show. So we sure do appreciate that.
All right. What do you got going on in cosplay?
All right. Well, as usual, you can catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I'll mention the 4th sister first, because, of course, we're talking about Inquisitors tonight. And she's definitely one of my favorite builds that I've done. And you can always catch me as Ahsoka, as well as 2 different versions of Hera and my original concept Mandalorian, based on Tahiri Vela, ooh, that was a tongue twister, from Legends. And I dabble in some other Star Wars and non-Star Wars characters as well. So once again, j.snipscosplay on Instagram.
Okay, upcoming on the show. Current plan for Friday is to get into recent Star Wars news. We'll see what actually happens. It's been kind of light lately. So if it's not that, we'll come up with something else to entertain you with. And then on Monday, we are getting back into the Clone Wars with a discussion of episode 11 from season 2. So make sure you join us for that. Okay. Thanks for listening to episode 907 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force